Homeless man returns $10,000. The twist no one saw coming. Rain hammered the cracked pavement of downtown Seattle as Marcus Webb crouched beneath a cardboard shelter outside the shuttered Greyhound station, his fingers numb, his stomach empty, wondering if he'd make it through another Pacific Northwest winter on these streets. He'd been homeless for 3 years now, ever since the factory closed and his wife left, taking their daughter Emily to her mother's place in Spokane. And though he'd tried everything, shelters, day labor, plasma donations, nothing stuck. Nothing saved him from the slow descent into invisibility that comes with sleeping on sidewalks where people step over you like you're already dead. That Tuesday morning started like any other, with Marcus digging through a dumpster behind the Fifth Avenue Starbucks, searching for day-old pastries the baristas sometimes left in clean bags on top of the trash, when he noticed something wedged between 2 garbage bags, a brown leather briefcase, expensive-looking, the kind lawyers carry, and his heart raced because he knew he shouldn't open it, knew that whatever was inside wasn't meant for him. But hunger does things to a man's conscience, makes you rationalize, makes you think maybe this is the universe finally giving you a break. His hands trembled as he clicked the brass latches open, and when he saw what was inside, his breath caught in his throat. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled, more money than he'd seen in his entire life, easily $10,000, maybe more, along with a business card that read Jennifer Hartwell, Senior VP, Cascade Financial Group, and a local area code. Marcus stared at that money for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his mind racing through possibilities. He could get a motel room, real food, new clothes for a job interview, maybe even a bus ticket to Spokane to see Emily, to show her that her daddy wasn't completely lost, that he could still be someone she'd be proud of. But then he thought about Jennifer Hartwell, about how terrified she must be right now, about how losing this money might cost her everything, her job, her reputation, maybe even her freedom if she was supposed to deposit it somewhere and couldn't explain where it went. He'd been that person once, the one who made a mistake at work, the one who felt the walls closing in, and he remembered how crushing that fear was, how it made you question everything about yourself. And despite the gnawing hunger in his belly and the cold that had settled into his bones like it planned to stay forever, Marcus knew he couldn't keep this money, couldn't become the kind of person who took advantage of someone else's nightmare just to solve his own problems. He pulled out his last $1.75 in change, walked 4 blocks to a payphone outside a 7-Eleven, one of the few that still worked in the city, and dialed the number on the business card, his voice shaking as a professional-sounding woman answered, and he explained that he'd found her briefcase and wanted to return it. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Marcus thought she'd hung up, but then he heard something that surprised him. She was crying, actually sobbing into the phone, saying, oh my God, thank you," over and over. And she gave him an address in the Belltown neighborhood, told him she'd be there in 20 minutes, and Marcus waited on that corner, clutching the briefcase like it contained the nuclear codes, watching expensive cars drive past, wondering if she'd even show up, or if this was some kind of setup. Jennifer Hartwell arrived in a sleek black Tesla, and when she stepped out, Marcus saw a woman in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled back, designer suit, the kind of person who probably never imagined she'd be meeting a homeless man on a street corner to retrieve her lost briefcase, and her eyes were red from crying, her hands shaking as she reached for it. And when she opened it, right there on the sidewalk, to verify the money was all there, she looked up at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else, something that looked almost like shame. She pulled out $500 and tried to hand it to him, but Marcus shook his head, said he didn't do it for a reward, did it because it was the right thing to do. And Jennifer just stared at him for a moment, before asking the question that would change everything. "What's your name, and how did you end up here?" Marcus told her everything, the whole pathetic story that he usually kept locked inside, because nobody wants to hear a homeless man's excuses. Told her about the factory closing, about his wife leaving, about the depression that made it impossible to keep fighting, about his daughter who was now 10 years old and probably barely remembered him. And Jennifer listened to every word, really listened, not with pity, but with something that looked like recognition, like she understood something about falling that Marcus hadn't expected someone like her to understand. When he finished talking, Jennifer made a phone call right there on the street, and 3 days later, Marcus found himself sitting in the office of Cascade Financial Group, wearing donated clothes from a shelter, but clean and shaven, being interviewed for a position in their mailroom, not because he was qualified, but because Jennifer had made it happen, had convinced the HR department to take a chance on a man who'd proven his character in a way no resume ever could. He got the job, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus had a reason to wake up before dawn, had a place to be where people knew his name, and the paycheck wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a tiny studio apartment in Rainier Valley, enough to start putting his life back together piece by piece, and he worked harder than he'd ever worked before, because he knew this was his last chance, his only chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. 6 months passed, and Marcus had been promoted to the accounting department, was taking night classes at Central Seattle College to finish the degree he'd abandoned 20 years ago, and he'd started video calling with Emily every Sunday, slowly rebuilding that relationship that he'd thought was lost forever. When Jennifer called him into her office one Tuesday afternoon, and he immediately felt that old familiar panic, the fear that it was all about to be taken away again, that someone had discovered he didn't really belong there. But Jennifer wasn't firing him. She was crying again, the way she had on the phone that first day, and she told Marcus something she'd never told anyone else at work. Told him that the money in that briefcase wasn't company money at all, that she'd been skimming from accounts for months to pay off a gambling debt she'd accumulated in a moment of weakness after her divorce. And she told Marcus that she'd been planning to disappear that day, to take what she'd stolen and run, start over somewhere else where nobody knew her name or her mistakes. But when he returned that briefcase, when he showed her that kind of integrity existed even in the darkest circumstances, she couldn't go through with it. She'd put every dollar back, had confessed to the company's CEO, and accepted whatever consequences came. And while she'd been demoted and on a strict repayment plan that would take years to complete, she'd kept her freedom and her chance to make things right. And she told Marcus that he saved her life that day outside the Greyhound station, saved her from becoming someone she would have hated forever. And she wanted him to know that the job, the opportunity, everything she'd done for him wasn't charity, it was gratitude, it was recognition, it was one broken person helping another broken person find their way back to something that looked like redemption. Marcus sat there stunned, realizing that the woman he'd thought was some perfect, successful person, living a life he could only dream of, actually was just as lost as he had been, just as terrified, just as human, and that his decision to return that money hadn't just changed his life, it had changed hers too, had created this strange symmetry where two people who had every reason to give up on themselves had instead found a reason to keep fighting. That night, Marcus called Emily, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of shame when he heard her voice, didn't feel like he had to apologize for existing, because he'd learned something that the streets had tried to beat out of him but couldn't, that your worst moment doesn't define you, that rock bottom isn't the end of the story, it's just the place where you decide what kind of person you're going to be when you start climbing back up. And sometimes the smallest act of integrity in your darkest hour becomes the foundation for everything that comes after. A year later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of a small apartment complex in Spokane, watching Emily run toward him with her backpack bouncing, coming to spend the summer with him in Seattle. And as he hugged his daughter and felt her arms wrap around him like she was never going to let go, he thought about that rainy Tuesday morning, about the briefcase in the dumpster, about the choice that seemed so impossible at the time, but was actually the easiest decision he'd ever made. Because when you've lost everything, the only thing you have left is who you are, and sometimes that's the only thing worth saving. In the end, Marcus learned what Jennifer learned, what maybe everyone needs to learn at some point when the darkness closes in and the easy path whispers in your ear, that the moment you choose integrity over survival, the moment you decide that who you are matters more than what you need, that's the moment you stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the author of your own redemption. And no amount of money, no matter how desperately you need it, is worth the